Welcome to Tales with Paws, where each story is a heartbeat, a memory, a second chance wrapped in fur. I have a question for you. Where in the world are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels, because this one today is different. This isn't just about a dog. It's not even just about a man. It's about something we all quietly long for. Recognition, connection, and redemption in the most unexpected form. Have you ever been somewhere you didn't plan to be? A place you almost skipped, but something, a whisper inside, told you to go anyway? That's how it all began. A young man named Ethan walked into a dusty auction house one chilly afternoon, not knowing he was about to find a ghost from his past, alive, trembling and forgotten in the center of a room full of noise. He wasn't looking for anything. He had no plans to buy a dog, and yet something happened in that moment that he couldn't explain. Something pulled him to the back of that crowd. And just like that, without a single word spoken, the story truly began. The auction house was old, its walls faded with time, its floor scuffed by years of boots, hooves, and hurried deals. The kind of place where people talk loud but feel little, where animals are paraded like objects and sold off like used tools. It wasn't where you went to find something meaningful. It was where things went to disappear. Ethan didn't know why he went there that day. He hadn't been to an auction in years. The memories were too heavy, too close to the surface. He was just passing through town when he saw the old wooden sign swinging in the wind. Something made him stop. Maybe it was the weather. Maybe it was the way his heart had been pulling him lately, restless, aching for something he couldn't name. He stood in the back of the room, unnoticed, blending in with the shadows. His military jacket was worn, the cuffs frayed from years of use. Hands in his pockets, eyes scanning the crowd. He didn't expect to stay long. A few goats came through, a couple of chickens, then a cow. The bids flew quickly, cold, transactional, and then everything shifted. A German shepherd was led into the center of the ring. The room didn't fall silent immediately, but the energy changed. You could feel it. The dog didn't bark, didn't resist. He just stood there. His fur was dull and patchy, his ribs slightly visible. Scars traced his legs and shoulders like old roads to places no one wanted to go. Someone in the front muttered, "Too aggressive, damaged." Laughter followed. Not cruel, just careless, indifferent. The kind that says this one doesn't matter. Ethan's chest tightened. He didn't move. He didn't know why, but something inside him snapped awake. It wasn't pity. It was something deeper. Recognition. No, that didn't make sense. The auctioneer barely looked up. Starting bid, $50. No one answered, not until Ethan did something even he didn't understand. His body moved before his thoughts could catch up. He stepped forward. "I'll take him," he said. And suddenly, the room went still. "I'll take him." The words hung in the air like a storm cloud, unnatural, unexpected, cutting through the stale room like a sudden gust of wind. Conversations halted, heads turned. The auctioneer blinked, thrown off script for the first time all afternoon. "Excuse me?" he asked, his voice half laugh, half cynicism. But Ethan didn't repeat himself. He didn't need to. He simply stepped forward, boots echoing across the concrete floor, the old wood groaning beneath each step. The people parted for him, not out of respect but confusion. Who would want that dog? No one knew what Ethan saw in that moment, not even Ethan himself. All he knew was that the closer he got, the quieter the world seemed to become. His gaze locked on the dog, whose eyes didn't lift, whose body didn't flinch. He looked like he'd stopped expecting anything from anyone a long time ago. And still, Ethan saw something there. Not defiance, not anger, but emptiness. A familiar kind of emptiness. He stopped a few feet away from the animal. The dog didn't meet his eyes. His tail didn't wag. No reaction. Just stillness, like a soldier waiting for orders that would never come. "I said I'll take him," Ethan repeated, softer this time. The auctioneer glanced at the crowd, then back at Ethan. "You serious?" he asked. Ethan nodded. $50 then, the man muttered, as if trying to dismiss the moment, make it less than what it was. He scribbled something in his notebook, then signaled the handler to release the leash. Ethan took it carefully, gently, as if holding something ancient and fragile. He didn't expect the dog to move, but he did. Slowly, hesitantly, as if unsure whether this was another transaction or the beginning of something real. Ethan turned toward the exit, leash in hand, the German Shepherd trailing a step behind. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. There are moments when life shifts so subtly, so profoundly, that the noise of the world fades. All that remains is the knowing. And Ethan knew. He didn't rescue the dog. He had just met someone he might have known all along. The walk to the truck was quiet, not the kind of quiet that feels awkward or empty. This was the kind that feels full, heavy even. The dog, still nameless, walked a few paces behind Ethan, not resisting, not pulling, just watching, observing, as if trying to figure out whether this was real or just another cruel stop on a long road of disappointment. Ethan opened the passenger door and waited. He didn't give commands, didn't whistle, just waited. And after a few uncertain seconds, the dog jumped in, curling into the corner like a soldier trained to take up as little space as possible. Ethan shut the door gently, walked around, and climbed into the driver's seat. As he turned the key, the truck rumbled to life, but he barely noticed. His mind was spinning. What had just happened? He glanced sideways. The dog didn't meet his eyes. Instead, he stared out the window, his body rigid but his breathing slow. Ethan saw it then, the scars. Not just the physical ones, but something deeper, the kind of wounds that don't bleed anymore, but still ache when the world gets too quiet. He knew that kind of pain. He had lived with it. Ethan didn't ask questions. He didn't speak. He just drove, miles of open road stretching ahead, the sun slipping lower into the hills. As the landscape shifted from rusted fences to golden fields, Ethan felt something in his chest ease, just a little. When they reached the ranch, he parked near the barn. The place was old, inherited, and mostly quiet these days, a place meant for healing, even if he hadn't realized it before. He opened the truck door and waited again. This time, the dog jumped out without hesitation, landing with a soft thud. He stood still for a moment, sniffing the wind. Then, cautiously, he followed Ethan toward the barn. No leash, no words, just two souls, equally unsure of what came next, walking side by side. And as they crossed the threshold into that quiet space, something passed between them. Not trust yet, but the possibility of it. The barn smelled of old wood and dust, of forgotten winters and quiet mornings. It wasn't perfect, but it was shelter. It was safe. Ethan hadn't stepped foot in there for weeks, maybe longer. Too many memories, too many ghosts. But now, it felt necessary. He pulled open the heavy door and stepped aside, letting the dog make his own choice. For a moment, the shepherd hesitated at the threshold, like something invisible was holding him back. Then he stepped inside, slowly, cautiously, his paws barely making a sound on the straw-covered floor. Ethan moved to the far corner where an old cot was still set up, a few wool blankets folded nearby. He laid one down, spread it over the straw without a word. When he turned, the dog was standing a few feet away, watching. Not scared, not eager, just there, present. Ethan knelt down, meeting him at eye level. "This is yours," he said softly. The dog didn't move, but his ears twitched. His eyes flicked to the blanket, then back to Ethan. And then, slowly, deliberately, he stepped forward, circled once, and laid down. His body still tense, but no longer on edge. That night, Ethan sat outside the barn door. He didn't go back to the house. He didn't want to. Something about this dog, about the silence they shared, felt more comforting than any bed ever could. The stars blinked above like silent witnesses. The wind danced across the fields, carrying with it a kind of peace that Ethan hadn't felt in years. He glanced inside. The dog was still awake, head resting on his paws, eyes on the door. And then it happened. Small, subtle, almost nothing. The dog's tail moved, not wagging, just a quiet flick, a signal, an acknowledgement. Ethan's throat tightened. They didn't know each other, not really, but something deep inside him whispered, "You've met before, not with your eyes, but with your scars." And in that stillness, in that barely noticeable gesture, Ethan knew. This wasn't the end of a long road. It was the start of a new one. The next morning, Ethan woke on the porch, the barn just a few steps away. His back ached from the wooden bench, but he didn't care. He'd slept lightly, listening to every sound, the wind through the grass, the creak of the barn walls, the soft, steady breathing of the dog within. When he opened the barn door, he half expected the dog to have run off in the night. But there he was, lying in the same spot, awake, watching. Something passed between them again, that silent flicker of acknowledgement. Not warmth, not yet, but not fear either, just presence. Ethan brought a bowl of water and a can of food, placed them gently nearby. The dog didn't rush, didn't move until Ethan stepped back. Then he ate slowly, deliberately, eyes always scanning the room like a soldier in unfamiliar territory. Later that afternoon, Ethan sat on the ground just outside the barn, sipping black coffee, the sun warming his face. He stared at the hills, but his mind was somewhere else. Years behind him, halfway across the world, Kandahar. He remembered the desert heat, the endless dust, the sound of helicopters fading into the distance. And something else. Something blurred. A mission gone wrong. An ambush. Screams. Chaos. He'd never spoken much about that day. Most of it was fragmented in his memory, like a puzzle missing its edges. But now, certain details began to drift back. A flash of fur, the sound of barking just before the explosion. A dog. Not just any dog, a German shepherd like this one. A military dog assigned to their unit. Trained, loyal, always alert. And then Ethan felt it. A knot in his stomach. A pull in his chest. Could it be? He glanced toward the barn. The dog was resting in the shade, head on his paws. Calm now, settled. But Ethan couldn't shake the thought. Was it possible that this dog wasn't a stranger at all? That he'd known him once, on a battlefield, not a barn floor? The memory was faint, but it was there. And like a whisper returning through time, it said, "Look closer." That night, the questions wouldn't let Ethan sleep. He paced the wooden floors of the house, the windows open to the cool air, letting the night wind carry in its quiet songs. But no breeze could calm the storm inside his chest. The memories were too loud now. The barking, the sand, the moment right before everything went wrong. That dog had warned them. He remembered it clearly now. Just before the ambush, the shepherd in their unit had growled, low and sharp, staring into the shadows. His handler had pulled him back, barked an order to stand down. Minutes later, chaos erupted. Could it be? Could this dog, the one now lying quietly in his barn, be the same? It didn't seem possible. And yet, the next morning, Ethan drove into town. He found Claire at the veterinary clinic, wiping her hands on a towel, surprised to see him so early. "I need your help," he said, voice strained but steady. They sat in her small back office, surrounded by stacks of medical folders and the smell of antiseptic. He told her everything about the auction, the connection he couldn't explain, the memories beginning to surface. Claire didn't laugh. She didn't question his gut. Instead, she opened her laptop and began typing. "If he was a military dog, there might be a record," she said. "It won't be easy. A lot of that information's sealed, but I know people." Ethan nodded, heart pounding. Hope, tangled with fear, pressed against his ribs. A few days later, she called him. "I found something," she said. "You need to come in." When Ethan arrived, she handed him a thin file. His hands trembled as he flipped through the pages. Medical data, deployment logs, photos, the breed matched, the age, the injury report from the ambush. Even the scar across the left shoulder, visible, identical to the one Ethan had seen under the fur. And then, at the bottom of the page, in small, faded print, subject deemed unfit for service, handler deceased, scheduled for termination. But somehow, he'd survived. Somehow, he'd come back. To Ethan. Ethan couldn't speak. He sat in the corner of Claire's small office, the file open in his hands, his fingers pressed tightly around the paper like it might disappear if he let go. The words blurred. His breath came shallow. His eyes kept drifting back to one line, scheduled for termination. Shadow, because that's what he had started calling him now without even realizing it, had been thrown away, branded a failure, forgotten, just like so many others. Claire sat quietly across from him, allowing the silence to stretch. She understood. This wasn't just about a dog anymore. It was about a lie Ethan had unknowingly carried with him for years. "I think he tried to warn us," Ethan said finally, his voice low and rough. "Before the ambush, he saw something, felt it, and they ignored him. I remember arguing with Major Harrison about it, but he wouldn't listen." Claire's brow furrowed. "Major Harrison? You mean he was the one in charge that day?" Ethan nodded. Claire hesitated, then leaned forward. "Ethan, these records, they're incomplete. There are redacted sections, names missing. But there's something else. Look here." She pointed to a service tag number scrawled beside a series of military logs. The same number was written by hand at the bottom of another document labeled Property Disposal Authorization. That's what Shadow had become to them. Property. Not a soldier, not a hero, just a broken asset to discard quietly. But somehow, someone had intervened. The record didn't say how Shadow escaped that fate, only that he vanished from the system, erased, hidden, alive. Ethan clenched his jaw. The guilt of that day, the nightmares, the faces of his friends. He'd carried all of it, believing it had just been a mission gone wrong. But now he knew. Shadow hadn't failed. He had been failed by the very people who should have protected him. And as Ethan closed the folder and looked out the office window into the open sky, one thought cut through everything else. They tried to erase a hero, but the past has a way of finding its way home. The drive back to the ranch was silent. Ethan had the windows cracked, the breeze brushing against his face, but he barely felt it. The weight of the file rested on the passenger seat beside him, light in size, heavy in meaning. Behind that paper trail lived years of injustice, years of silence, but now it had a voice. When he pulled into the driveway, the sun was just starting to dip behind the hills, casting long shadows across the field. Shadow, his shadow now, was lying in the tall grass near the barn, head up, ears alert. When he saw Ethan step out of the truck, he rose and trotted toward him with a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before. Ethan crouched down, and for the first time, Shadow didn't hesitate. He leaned into his touch, pressing his head against Ethan's chest, as if saying, "You found me." "Again," Ethan whispered. "They tried to forget you, but I won't. Not ever." From that day forward, everything changed. The nightmares didn't stop, not completely. But now, Ethan didn't face them alone. In the stillness of night, when memories crept in like cold wind through cracks in the walls, Shadow was there, by the door, on the floor, always watching, always present. They began to walk the ranch together every morning, quiet walks, healing walks. With each step, Ethan spoke more, sometimes aloud, sometimes only in his heart. He told Shadow stories, apologized for what had happened, promised to make it right. And though Shadow never answered in words, Ethan always felt heard. One afternoon, they returned to the barn, and Ethan hung something above the stall where Shadow slept. A small plaque that read, "Service Never Forgotten." It wasn't just a tribute, it was a vow. Shadow had been a soldier, a protector, a survivor, just like Ethan. And now they weren't just healing together. They were living, breathing, building something new, not out of what was broken, but from what had endured. And as the sun set over the hills once more, Ethan looked down at the dog beside him, battle-worn, scarred, loyal, and smiled. They had found their way back to each other, and this time, neither would be left behind. So now that you've walked with us through every step of this story, what are you feeling? Let's pause and look back. It began with a quiet man walking into a loud auction house, unsure of why he was even there. A moment most people would have passed by. A dog, dismissed as worthless, labeled aggressive, broken, forgotten, one no one wanted. But that moment changed everything, because Ethan wasn't just buying a dog. He was unknowingly bringing home a piece of his past, a soul who had once stood beside him in the dust and danger of war. A soldier with 4 legs and a heart trained to protect, a companion who had once tried to warn him of danger and was punished for it. Shadow wasn't lost. He was erased. And yet somehow, through the mess of fate and memory, they found each other again, not by chance, but maybe by grace. And through the silence of the barn, the long walks, the soft tail wags, and the quiet glances, they healed. Not just from what had been done to them, but from what had been taken. They weren't rescuing each other, they were remembering each other and choosing to stay. If this story touched your heart, even just a little, I ask you for one small thing in return. Subscribe to Tales with Paws. It took time, research, editing, voice, and soul to bring this story to life. And we do it all to remind you of something simple. There is still goodness in this world. There is still hope. And sometimes the ones we think are broken are the ones who save us. So please, leave a comment below. Tell us where you're watching from. Tell us your biggest dream. Tell us if you've ever felt a connection like Ethan and Shadow's. Your words matter here. They help us keep telling stories that matter. And while you're at it, click the like button. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder of what loyalty looks like. And check out the other stories on our channel. Each one is a heartbeat, a truth, a second chance. Because here at Tales with Paws, we don't just tell stories, we remember them together. So, what part of this story stayed with you the most? We're listening. Let the comments begin.